The day had begun like so many others in my quiet, predictable routine. The sky outside was a soft gray, heavy with the kind of clouds that promised either a drizzle or nothing at all. The kind of sky that makes you want to stay indoors, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea and listening to the familiar sounds of home. That's exactly what I was doing. The old clock on the wall ticked steadily, its sound filling the silence in a way that was almost comforting. My knitting basket sat by my feet, a finished scarf spilling out of it like a colorful little secret. I had just settled into my chair by the window. It's the one spot in the house where I could watch the world outside without being part of it. The neighbors walked their dogs, children played with balls that rolled too far, and the mailman made his usual stop at the end of our lane. Nothing extraordinary, nothing to disturb the rhythm of the day. That's why the knock startled me. It wasn't a gentle knock. It's a kind that visitors usually gave when they came at a polite hour. It wasn't even the firm, business-like rap of the deliveryman. This knock was urgent, hurried, as if the person on the other side was unsure whether they wanted to be there at all, but couldn't help themselves. My heart gave a little leap, a mix of curiosity and unease, as I set my cup down carefully, afraid the tremor in my hand might spill the tea. When I opened the door, I nearly gasped. There he was. My grandson. My sweet boy, taller now than I remembered. His hair a mess, as if he had been running his hands through it over and over. He wore a backpack slung haphazardly over one shoulder, and his clothes looked slightly rumpled, as though he had left in a rush. His eyes wide, restless, and filled with something I couldn't immediately name. Locked onto mine. "Grandma," he said, his voice wavering just enough to betray the storm inside him. I needed to come. For a moment, I simply stood there, frozen. My mind struggled to catch up with my heart. I hadn't been expecting him, not today, not this week, not even this month. His visits were always planned, coordinated with phone calls and calendars. His parents were careful about such things, making sure I was prepared and that his schedule didn't interfere with school or sports or any of the dozen responsibilities they piled on him. For him to show up unannounced, alone, was something that had never happened before. 1,000 questions rushed to my lips at once. Where are your parents? Do they know you're here? Are you all right? What's happened? But all I managed to say was, "Come in, sweetheart. Come inside." He stepped over the threshold, and I noticed how tightly he gripped the strap of his backpack, as if it were the only anchor keeping him steady. His shoes left faint marks on the mat, damp from the drizzle that must have started while I wasn't looking. I closed the door behind him, the click of the lock sounding louder than usual in the silence. Inside. The warmth of the house seemed to soften his expression, but only slightly. He stood in the hallway, shifting from one foot to the other, glancing around as though seeing the house anew. Perhaps it had been months since his last visit, but to me it felt like yesterday. Children grow so quickly. Each time I saw him, there was something new, an inch taller, a deeper tone in his voice, a different look in his eyes. Today, though, the difference was more than physical. There was something heavy on his shoulders, something that had brought him to my door without warning. I reached out and touched his arm gently. "You look like you've come a long way. Have you eaten?" He shook his head, not meeting my eyes. "I'm not really hungry," that, more than anything, set off alarms in my heart. He was always hungry. A growing boy, always raiding the kitchen for snacks, always asking if I had something sweet tucked away. For him to refuse food meant something was truly wrong. I led him into the living room, urging him to sit. He perched on the edge of the sofa, backpack still strapped to his shoulders, as if he wasn't sure he would stay. His hands fidgeted in his lap, twisting and untwisting the zipper. I wanted to press him with questions to demand an explanation, but I knew better. Children, even ones who weren't quite children anymore, didn't open up under interrogation. They needed time, patience, and trust. So I busied myself in the kitchen, making another pot of tea, slicing an apple, placing a plate of biscuits on the tray. All the while I kept stealing glances at him, noticing the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darted to the window as though afraid someone might follow him here. When I returned and placed the tray on the table, I finally sat beside him, close enough for comfort, but not so close as to crowd him. You don't have to say anything right now, I told him softly. I'm just glad you're here. At that, his shoulders slumped, as if the weight of those words lifted something off him. Still, he didn't speak. Instead, he reached for a biscuit, broke it in half, and stared at the crumbs on his fingers. His silence was louder than any words could have been. I felt my heart ache with a mixture of love and fear. Love, because he was my grandson, my flesh and blood, sitting in my home when he needed me most. Fear, because something serious must have driven him here. Children don't just arrive unexpectedly, miles from home, without reason. The clock ticked on, the steady rhythm filling the pauses between us. I sipped my tea, pretending not to watch him too closely, though every part of me was on high alert. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Grandma," he whispered again, softer this time. I just couldn't stay there anymore. The words landed in my chest like a stone, heavy and cold. I didn't yet know what he meant or what had happened. But I knew in that instant that my quiet, ordinary day had been transformed into something else entirely. Something I hadn't expected, something that would change not only this day but many days to come. For a while after my grandson's unexpected arrival, the house was filled with silence, save for the ticking clock and the occasional clink of a teacup against porcelain. I sat beside him on the sofa, my hands folded carefully in my lap, resisting the urge to pepper him with questions. His presence was enough to stir 1,000 emotions within me, relief that he was safe, worry about what had driven him here, and a quiet, gnawing dread of what I might learn once he finally spoke. He hadn't removed his backpack. It sat across his shoulders like armor, his small fingers tugging at the straps whenever he grew to still. He nibbled absent-mindedly at the edge of a biscuit, but his eyes remained distant, focused not on the food, not on me, but on some invisible weight pressing down on him. Finally, I said gently, "You don't have to explain right now, sweetheart. Just know that you're safe here. You can stay as long as you need." His head snapped toward me, his eyes wide with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Gratitude maybe, but also fear. For a moment, I thought he might cry, but instead, he let out a shaky breath and slumped back against the cushions. "Grandma," he murmured, his voice catching in his throat. I couldn't stay there anymore. The words lingered in the air, heavy and uncertain. My first instinct was alarm. Did he mean he was in danger? Had something terrible happened at home? My mind raced with possibilities, arguments, accidents, perhaps even something darker. But before I let my imagination run too far, I reminded myself to listen. To give him the space to untangle his own story, I reached for his hand. The same hand I had held when he was a toddler wobbling on unsteady feet. It was larger now, the knuckles sharper, the skin no longer as soft as I remembered. Yet beneath that newness, it was still the same hand, trembling slightly in mine. "Tell me, darling," I whispered, "what happened?" He swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the window before coming back to me. It's not like they hurt me," he began, his words stumbling over themselves. "It's not like that. But I can't breathe there anymore. It's like nobody hears me. It's like I don't even exist unless I'm doing exactly what they expect." His voice cracked at the last word. He dropped his gaze to the floor. My heart ached at the confession. I thought back to when his father was his age, my son, who had once slammed doors and muttered about rules he thought were unfair. But this felt different. My grandson's tone wasn't defiant or rebellious. It was tired, broken in a way that frightened me. "They don't mean to make me feel that way," he continued, almost apologetically, as though defending his parents. They want me to be perfect. Always studying, always practicing, always being the good kid. I try, Grandma, I really do. But no matter what, it's never enough. And I'm so tired of pretending I'm okay with it." I listened without interrupting, my fingers tightening slightly around his hand. Every word seemed to peel back another layer of his pain, revealing a boy who felt suffocated not by cruelty, but by the relentless pressure of expectation. He wasn't running from harm, but from silence from a home where his voice had grown too small to be heard. I didn't even tell. I was leaving, he confessed, his voice barely audible now. I just grabbed my bag and walked out. I don't even know if they've noticed yet. The admission made my stomach twist. I could imagine the panic his parents might be feeling at this very moment, searching the house, calling his name. Part of me wanted to rush to the phone to reassure them he was safe. But another part of me, the part that saw the fragile look in his eyes, knew that if I broke his trust now, I might lose something even more precious instead. I asked softly, "And what did you hope to find here at Gra?" That evening, as the gray skies darkened into the hush of night, my house seemed to take on a new energy. Usually evenings were my quietest hours, a warm meal, the lamp casting soft golden light over my reading chair, the hum of the radio playing old songs from another time. But with my grandson there, the air itself felt different, alive with possibility, as though the walls had been waiting for laughter again. He had fallen silent after his confession, perhaps exhausted from unburdening himself. I didn't push him to say more. Instead, I suggested we cook dinner together. He looked at me, startled, as though cooking wasn't what he had expected. "Dinner?" he asked with a note of uncertainty. "Yes, dinner," I said, smiling as I stood. "Unless you'd rather just sit and let me fuss over you, which I warn you, very good at." For the first time all day, a genuine laugh escaped his lips. It was small, fleeting, but it was real. He shrugged off his backpack, finally leaving it by the sofa, followed me into the kitchen. I decided on something simple, pasta with tomato sauce. Nothing extravagant, but it was hearty and warm, the kind of meal that comforts without trying too hard. He washed the tomatoes at the sink while I chopped garlic, and soon we were moving around each other in a quiet rhythm. He was awkward at first, too cautious with the knife, fumbling with the stove knobs, but there was something healing in the clumsiness. When I spilled a bit of flour on my apron while trying to knead dough for the pasta, he laughed outright, the sound bubbling up like it hadn't in a long time. "Grandma," he teased, "you're supposed to be the expert here." "Even experts make mistakes," I said, wagging the flour-covered spoon at him. "And sometimes mistakes make the best stories." He grinned at that. And for a moment, the heaviness he'd carried into my home seemed to lift, the kitchen filled with the smells of garlic, onions, and simmering sauce. He stirred the pot carefully while I rolled out the dough. And when he accidentally dropped a noodle on the floor, we both laughed so hard tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. It felt like more than cooking. It felt like weaving ourselves into each other's company, patching small rips of loneliness with laughter and warmth. Dinner was delicious, though we both agreed the pasta was slightly too thick and the sauce a little too salty. But those imperfections didn't matter. What mattered was the way we sat across from each other, plates full, talking not about school or rules or expectations, but about silly things, which superhero we'd want to be, whether cats secretly ruled the world, and why tea always tastes better in a mug than in a cup. After we ate, we carried our full bellies and tired laughter into the living room. I pulled out the old knitted blanket that had been folded neatly over the arm of the sofa and draped it over him. He settled into the cushions, looking younger than he had all day, though his voice carried the weight of someone much older. "Grandma," he said softly, "do you ever feel like you had dreams you had to give up?" The question caught me off guard. I had spent the last few hours trying to keep things light, to give him a space where he didn't have to feel the heaviness of his burdens. But now he had opened a door to something deeper, something more vulnerable. I took a deep breath. "Yes," I admitted. "When I was your age, I wanted to be a painter. I loved colors, brushes, canvases. I dreamed of filling walls with my work. But life." I paused, choosing my words carefully. Life had other plans. I married, I raised a family, I built a home. Those things mattered, and I don't regret them. But yes, some dreams had to be put away. His eyes widened, as though he had never considered that adults carried such stories inside them. "Do you ever wish you had chosen differently?" "Sometimes," I said honestly. "But what I've learned is that even if we can't follow every dream, the important ones never really leave us. They find ways to show up again, sometimes through the people we love." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "Maybe that's why you love writing. Maybe you're carrying the dreams I had to put down." He was quiet for a long time, staring into the glow of the lamp. Then he whispered, "I'm scared, Grandma. Scared that if I choose writing, I'll disappoint everyone. But if I don't, I'll disappoint myself." Those words cut through me. I wanted to shield him, to promise him the world would bend kindly to his hopes, but I knew better. Life could be harsh, and dreams often came with thorns. Yet, I also knew that stifling those dreams could wound more deeply than failure ever could. "You don't have to have all the answers tonight," I said softly. "But you do need to promise me one thing. Never silence yourself just to make others comfortable. Your voice is worth hearing, even if it shakes." His eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but he nodded firmly. "I promise." What followed was a kind of magic. He pulled out a worn notebook from his backpack, its cover bent and pages doggered. "These are just little things I've written," he said shyly. "Nothing good. Let me be the judge of that," I teased gently. And so, under the lamplight, he read aloud pieces of his secret world, short stories about distant planets, poems about lonely trees, a half-finished tale of a boy who could hear the thoughts of animals. His words were raw, unpolished, but they carried a spark of imagination that made my chest swell with pride. "Nothing good?" I scoffed when he finished. "Darling, these are wonderful. They're alive. You have a gift." His cheeks flushed, and he ducked his head. But I could see the pride in his smile. We stayed there for hours, our voices low, as though we were sharing secrets the night itself might guard for us. At some point, his eyelids grew heavy. He lay down on the sofa, pulling the blanket up to his chin, and drifted into sleep. I sat beside him, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. In the quiet, I thought of my own son, his father at this age. How I had struggled to understand him, how easily I had missed the signals of what he needed, and I wondered whether history was repeating itself. Only this time, I had been given another chance to listen. I stroked my grandson's hair gently, whispering, though he could not hear me, "You are not alone. Not here, not ever." The clock ticked past midnight, but I didn't move. I stayed there, keeping watch over him, holding on to the fragile, beautiful gift of this night and night. I knew I would carry in my heart for the rest of my life. It truly was a night to remember. The dawn arrived quietly, slipping into the house through the lace curtains and faint golden streaks. I had barely slept, choosing instead to sit in my armchair and watch over my grandson as he lay curled on the sofa, wrapped in the old knitted blanket. His face, softened in sleep, seemed younger than it had the day before, unburdened for the moment of the weight he carried when awake. The rise and fall of his chest was steady, reassuring, and I found myself whispering a silent prayer of gratitude that he had come to me. But the peace of that moment couldn't hold back reality forever. As the light grew stronger, so too did the unease in my chest. His parents would know by now. They must have woken in panic, searching his room, calling his friends, wondering where their son had gone. My heart ached for them, even as I wanted to protect him. It was a delicate balance, love for my grandson pressing against the bond I still shared with my son and his wife. I rose quietly, moving into the kitchen to put on the kettle. The ritual of tea-making grounded me, water filling the pot, the hiss of the flame, the earthy smell of leaves as I scooped them into the teapot. But even as I moved through the motions, my ears strained toward the phone on the counter. I knew it would ring soon, and ring it did. The shrill sound shattered the fragile stillness, echoing through the house. I glanced toward the living room. My grandson stirred but didn't wake. Taking a deep breath, I lifted the receiver. "Mom." My son's voice was frantic, unsteady. "Is he there?" "Please tell me he's there." "Yes," I said softly. "He's here. He came last night. He's safe." I heard a sharp exhale on the other end, relief so intense it nearly made me cry myself. But his relief quickly hardened into something else. "Why didn't you call us the moment he showed up?" "We've been terrified." I closed my eyes, steadying my voice. "Because he needed me to listen before anyone else. He wasn't ready to face you yet. And I wasn't going to betray his trust." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, my son muttered, were coming over. By the time they arrived, the house smelled of toast and tea. My grandson was awake now, sitting at the table, his hair tousled and his eyes heavy with sleep. He looked at me nervously as the sound of a car pulling into the driveway reached us. His hands tightened around his teacup. "They're here, aren't they?" he whispered. I placed my hand over his. "Yes. And whatever happens, I'll be right here." The knock on the door was sharp, urgent. When I opened it, I found my son and his wife standing there, both pale, their eyes red-rimmed from a night without sleep. Relief flooded their faces when they saw their boy at the table, alive and unharmed. His mother rushed past me, wrapping him in her arms so tightly he nearly toppled the chair. My son followed, his voice breaking as he said, "We thought we'd lost you. The reunion should have eased the tension in the room." But it didn't. My grandson sat stiffly in his mother's embrace, his eyes darting toward me as if to ask whether he should speak the truth now. I pulled out chairs for them all, urging everyone to sit. "We need to talk," I said gently. The kitchen became the stage for one of the hardest conversations I had ever witnessed.